All right. Welcome, everyone, to the fundamentals of thesis writing. My name is Joellen. I'm with firstediting.com. Today, we are going to cover the fundamentals of thesis writing with Dr. Lindy Ledohowski from Wise Prep. Hi, Lindy.
Hi, Joellen.
So today's thesis or dissertation, everyone drop your names in, drop where you are. We'll say hi. We'll do all those formal little things, but I really like go directly into what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of thesis writing. So this is a thesis or dissertation in most of the subject areas. That's from sciences to social sciences to humanities. They all have similar structures. So we're going to be talking about those. And most introductory sections have literature review sections and methodology sections. So we're going to focus on those today. And how exactly do you write these? We're going to ask Lindy Ledohowski, and she is going to be our writing expert and scholar, and she's going to break down the most important parts of thesis writing for you. So thank you, Dr. Lindy, for joining us. I'm so glad to have you here. This is an exciting time for you.
It is indeed very exciting time.
Yeah, so Dr. Lindy Ledohowski, let me introduce her exactly, and everyone can follow in on what's happening here. But she's an award-winning educator, an entrepreneur, and scholar. She holds a PhD in English, and she completed her English postdoctoral fellowship, and then she was an English professor. But most importantly, she went on to co-found and run the Essay Jack academic writing software, which is how we met, which is so exciting. And you've been doing that for 5 years now. And I guess we met maybe 4, I think. So it was pretty early along in there. And it's been acquired by Wise Prep, which is a very exciting thing to happen here. And she's now Wise Prep's Chief Operating Officer. And you're overseeing all the operations and marketing for the company, which is huge.
It is. It's a big job, let me tell you, Joellen.
Yeah, I can imagine. So this is a big thing. Since you have that PhD in English and you were an English professor before co-founding and creating Essay Jack, just want to ask you, how is it being rebooted as Wise Writer? Because you've gone from one product to the next. Kind of let us know what's going on behind the scenes there.
Yeah, I am absolutely happy to share some of that story. And one of the things as well, as somebody, so I, as Joellen says, PhD, postdoc, won all the awards, peer-reviewed scholarship as an English scholar, and I was a tenure track professor. And it was through that experience of being a professor that I wanted to, I guess, do something else, innovate in the education space, in the academic writing space specifically, and co-founded Essay Jack at the end of 2015. And then it was acquired by Wise Prep in July 2021. And a little bit about both and sort of how it ties to thesis and dissertation and academic careers and all of that is kind of interesting in a couple of different ways. So one, the Essay Jack academic writing software, last year, the first year after the acquisition, we kind of still ran it as Essay Jack as an independent website. Just this August and September, we're now rolling it into Wise Prep so that it's wiseprep.com/wisewriter now. And if you go to essayjack.com, it'll automatically redirect you to that Wise Writer page as we bring things together. And what's really interesting to me now, as a former English professor, now Chief Operating Officer of a larger ed tech company. So Wise Prep offers supplementary education offerings to students in STEM, in business. It's course-specific, campus-specific additional resources. It's an amazing product. And then the Wise Writer piece is the kind of humanities and social sciences, or the writing piece, that comes into play to offer this full suite for students who are studying. But what's really interesting to me as well is, and I mean, while we'll be talking about the fundamentals of thesis writing and a thesis and dissertation, a kind of side part that's worth sharing, and I think that is interesting from that story of professor to edtech startup co-founder through an acquisition to being COO of another tech company, is also a story about life on an alternative academic path or a post-academic path. So often people, once they complete their PhDs, they their only thought is, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a professor. And sometimes that doesn't work out. And so I kind of find it interesting that I can say, like, no, you don't have to. I was a professor. You don't have to stay being a professor. I have this really interesting and vibrant career as a chief operating officer, which, as you say, means I oversee operations and marketing. And what does that really mean? It means I have my fingers in all of the pies at WisePrep. And particularly right now, we're expanding to 40 new campuses across the US. And so, having a role to play in that is fascinating. We get to help more and more students. So again, it's really rewarding and enriching professionally, but it also ties into the things that I love about being able to help more and more students. And it's just now I can do that through WisePrep and WiseWriter as opposed to a traditional classroom as a professor.
Right. And as a COO, you're doing a lot of writing.
Oh, you better believe it. So I'm doing a lot of writing. My staff is doing writing that I'm evaluating. So yeah, the workplace is definitely one where the art of writing and communicating by writing is not dead. Again, in this post-pandemic world, so WisePrep too is a fully remote company, which means that a lot of our communication is written communication because we're all over the place and we're North America based principally,
Right.
but that's people all across Canada and the US. And so if you can't communicate meaningfully in writing with your colleagues, not only can that slow down the workplace productivity, but it can also break down the community building that happens when you're sending messages to each other, you're communicating things in writing for each other to evaluate. So yes, the world of writing is one that I'm still very much immersed in.
All right. It's a lot. It's a lot. Well, today we're going to go through the fundamentals of thesis writing. So you're not doing that so much, but at least not for work.
Yeah. No, but as I say, I do still at WisePrep, we have master's and PhD level educators that we're hiring to do some of the content creation, everything. So it's not like I'm outside of the world of academic writing in its entirety.
No. You're in it completely. So we have some questions for you today, so we can go through and kind of answer some of these questions about thesis writing. We're editors, professional editors. So why we've invited Lindy here today is to basically show you how preparing and using the correct tools can really help your writing, so that when you get to the point when you are hiring an editor, which can be quite expensive, that you are prepared to get the best return on your investment there, and that you can have a cohesive communication there, understanding the same dynamics of what we're looking for and why. And if you can get that structure and everything there correctly, you're going to succeed more as an academic writer, and you're going to achieve all those goals that you have for yourself. So I have 4 questions for you today, and we'll go through those. I'm going to start with my first one here. It is, what is a thesis? Who writes it? Why do we have this? What are we talking about? So that everybody has the same foundation.
Yep, that's a really good question, and I have an answer which I've put up here as well, with a link to a guest blog that I actually did for Joellen and the team at First Editing once upon a time, that answers this question. So, what is a dissertation and thesis? And again, the specific details of a dissertation or thesis will differ from institution to institution, and from discipline to discipline. So the technical elements might be different from place to place, but broadly, there's a sense of uniformity. So a thesis or dissertation, generally speaking, refers to a research paper at the master's degree level, and a dissertation generally refers to a much longer book-length research project at the doctoral level. So often a thesis could be somewhere between 20 and 60 pages. A doctoral dissertation can be upwards of 300 pages. However, often these two terms are used interchangeably. So in some countries, a master's thesis is also called a dissertation. In some countries, a PhD dissertation is also called a thesis. And so ultimately, the terms can be interchanged, but in both cases, whether it's a master's thesis or dissertation, it will be shorter in length, and it will kind of tackle one specific problem, one component part. If it's a PhD, dissertation, or thesis, it's going to be much longer, and it'll be a multi-year research project. So again, both of them refer to graduate work. So whether it's a master's or a PhD, those are considered graduate degrees. And whether it's a dissertation or a thesis, it refers to conducting independent research with the help of a supervisor and committee and writing up that independent research with the help of a supervisor and committee. So it's really the first step on your journey to being a scholar. And so if an undergraduate degree is the degree that you complete upon finishing high school or secondary education, then the graduate degree, or sometimes it's referred to postgraduate, depending on your context, is that next step. So what happens when you're being invited to be somewhat of an independent researcher? So again, as Jo Ellen said, we want to all be kind of on the same page, but there's nuance in here. So a dissertation thesis refers to something at the master's or PhD level, and the scope of each is what's going to differentiate the two of them. So usually a master's project is going to be shorter and more limited in scope, and a PhD project will be longer and more extensive in scope.
Exactly. So now we have that foundation. So let's go on to our next one, and let's talk about what composes this thesis or dissertation so that it makes it, we need to be on the same page about what we're doing here. So what is the most important components or parts of this academic thesis or dissertation?
Yeah, so we've got a little infographic here to get us started. And we're going to talk about this in sort of more detail and a little bit more excruciating detail. But broadly speaking, and again, this is very helpful if you are beginning your master's or your PhD journey. So often what happens is that we as scholars, we kind of assume everybody knows what a thesis or a dissertation is, because it's been so long ago since we've completed our own that we forget that when you start, you have no idea what you're getting into. So when you start your master's and when you start your PhD, you've probably never read a dissertation or a thesis before. You have no idea what the component parts are. But again, often, your supervisor, your committee, your professors, we forget what it's like to not know those basic fundamental things. So that's what this is to do, is to give us that grounding so that as we begin a master's or a PhD level project, a thesis or a dissertation, we know the component parts that are going to appear in pretty much all of these theses and dissertations. Again, depending on your field, if you're a criminologist or a physicist or a historian or a religious studies scholar, the details of what makes up your research will be very different. So research that's done in field work that is quantitative in nature will be very different from qualitative research that's done perhaps through interviews and ethnographic studies, which is going to be very different from theoretical research, which is getting into sort of philosophical debates. So those technical details will be different, but structurally, regardless of the fields that you are producing doctoral or master's level work, you're going to have these component parts. So you'll need an introductory section, and in the introductory section, you're going to need topic, background, literature review, and methodology sections. And again, in the topic, you need to clearly state the broad field into which your research falls. So again, this is going to be a whole section where you're starting broad and moving in narrowly. So if your thesis or dissertation is looking at settlement patterns in a particular country, again, you may situate that within the broader field, so immigration studies. And then you're looking at immigration and settlement patterns between a particular set of years. And perhaps there's other socioeconomic or demographic information that all composes your topic. And so only you will know what the broad topic and broad field is, and then what your part of that broad field is going to be. How are you contributing to that broad field? But that broad field, you do need to state that very early on. I mean, a dissertation or a thesis in, classical Latin, Roman settlement is going to be very different than looking at the habitation patterns in contemporary sub-Saharan Africa. So even though both of those might be looking at settlement and migration, historically it's going to be very different. There'll be sort of different dynamics and probably different aspects of those fields at play. So you need to be very specific at the beginning and outlining your topic within the broader field. So again, the number one sort of bit of advice here in terms of the topic section of your thesis or your dissertation is to make sure that what you are communicating to your reader is that, hey, I know the field. My field is called criminology. Within criminology, there are these subfields. And within this subfield, here's my topic. And so you need to lay that out as clearly as possible in your topic section. The next aspect of your introductory section is the background, where you really want to provide some relevant context. Often this is going to be, what are the major debates in your field? Or what's the other research? Who else has said something? So that you can kind of give the lay of the land to your reader and kind of demonstrate that, hey, I have a right to be here. I know the field. I know what it looks like. I know what we're getting ourselves into. And then again, you're going to want to bleed from that general background section into the more specific literature review. And this is again where you're providing a survey of the research in your field. So this isn't just kind of a list being like, hey, I did my reading, look at this list. This is where you shape your analysis of the research in your field as it relates to your own study. And similarly, then as you move on into the methodology section, this is again where you situate how you do what you do. So I've already given lots of examples. There can be case studies, there can be ethnography, there can be close reading analysis, there can be interviews, there can be data collection, there can be lab work, so there's all kinds of approaches to producing scholarship. And what you need to do in the methodology section is explain what your approach is to produce scholarship. So that is your introductory section. And by introductory section, that's not just one paragraph. That's probably an entire chapter. If it's only a master's level thesis, it might be a little bit more condensed because the expectations of the breadth of the scholarship will be a little bit reduced. But again, that entire introductory section, if it's a dissertation, it'll probably be a chapter. If it's a master's thesis, it's going to be like a big section unto itself with topic, background, literature review, and methodology. Then you get to the kind of most important part of your thesis or dissertation, and this is the body section, where you're going to have to provide your problem statement. And your problem statement is, okay, this is the thing that I want to figure out. This is the question that I'm going to explore. This is the thesis I'm going to advance. This is whatever it is that animates your research. That's your problem statement. I've discovered an anomaly in this scientific data set. I've discovered a gap in the scholarly literature. I've discovered an actual new artifact through my archaeological dig. Whatever it is that is going to be the real core of your thesis or dissertation, that's your problem statement. And then the analysis component is how you go about analyzing that particular data. And that, I haven't kind of broken down that section because that's where it now will be very different from discipline to discipline. So the analysis of quantitative data in a hard science will be very different from qualitative data in a social science, which will be very different from a theoretical analysis of texts in a humanities field. So that's why analysis is just kind of one word there, because that will be the most specific to what you and your supervisor and your committee are working on. But again, every kind of thesis or dissertation is going to have that problem statement and then the analysis component. And that's where it ends up being kind of very specific to your field. And then, of course, you have that concluding section, which ties everything together and also identifies gaps that you weren't able to explore, avenues for further study. So the concluding section is where you go, oh my gosh, so that was my problem statement. And this is how I've, analyzed that problem statement and brought this research to bear. Here are the things that were out of scope, either it is interesting lines of research which couldn't fit into this dissertation or thesis. And here are some things that I might pursue in future to extend this. So again, a lot of talking, but you've got the visuals here to say a thesis and a dissertation. It needs your introduction, your body, and your conclusion. The introduction, topic, background, literature review, methodology. Your body section is your problem statement, and then the analysis of the data.
Exactly. So that brings us into, as we're looking at this list here, we want to talk about this literature review and what is it, what it needs to include, because that's really important when we're looking at this and we're trying to help people edit. We need to, what's going on here. So can you dig a bit deeper into that? That's our next question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've talked about a lot of this, and then we want to get into this literature review. So the literature review is not an annotated bibliography or a mere summary of the relevant research. Instead, it's a section that demonstrates you've done the relevant reading and research and made sense of that external research. And again, the reason that we want to talk about both the literature review and the methodology in a little bit greater detail is in part because these are the areas that students struggle with the most. And I'll jump into WiseWriter by the time we get to the end to kind of show you in practice how we can create a literature review that's going to answer the kinds of questions that scholars are looking for. But what a literature review is, broadly speaking, is this is the opportunity for you as a scholar to show that you've done your reading. But to show that you've done your reading and the reading has come in, you've interpreted it and produced it in a way that it speaks to your problem statement. So again, if we go back here, you've got the clear topic statement, relevant historical, geographical, technical background, all of that. And then a literature review is a survey of the related scholarship. So it's got to be related to your problem statement. So if your problem statement is, this is what I'm going to argue, my literature review is, and here's what other people have said about this particular topic. Here's what the scholarship out there in the field seems to be saying. So one way that you can organize your literature review is to create different camps in the scholarship. So sometimes that's a good heuristic where you may say, okay, on the one, and even before you start writing, you can have kind of your charts, and you can do this by paper, you can do this on spreadsheets. Where you're basically saying, okay, there's this view, and then you list all of the things that you've read that are under view X. Then you might say, okay, well, there's also view Y, which is the opposite of X. And then you can list all of the ones under view Y. Then when it comes to you creating your literature review, you may say that generally speaking, there are two camps in the scholarship. One camp believes X, for example, and then you start to talk about those other scholars and how their writing is evidence of their belief in X. And then you get to the sort of end of that portion and go, on the other hand, there's another camp that believes Y. Y is, and you say what that belief broadly speaking is, and then you can go through the scholarship that you've found that falls into category Y and say, okay, here's what some of the scholars have to say about Y. Then you may discover that in your reading of all of the topics in the field, there are some things and they're neither X and they're neither Y. They don't fall into that. They're kind of outliers. So then at that part of your literature review, you'd be able to say, and there's some scholarship which takes a unique view. For example, and then you go through the scholarship that you found that doesn't neatly fall into one of the pre-existing buckets. So what you've done in that kind of structure is that you've not only showed, hey, I've done my research, but you've shown your own ability to interpret and categorize the research and data in a way that is your own. Because ultimately, this literature review part isn't just showing your committee or your supervisor like, hey, I've done the reading. Nobody wants to read a list of summary of other research. What we want to read is something that gives us evidence that you've read the scholarship and you can speak intelligently about how that scholarship relates to the field as a whole and your research in particular.
Exactly. So that's where all the different things need to be included. So let's go on to our next one about the methodology, because we have that sitting right under there. So our question is, how do you write a methodology section? What needs to be included here?
Yeah, and so I've kind of prefigured this a little bit, to like pre-gamed it for you, so you have a little bit of a clue in advance. And again, the reason we're sort of zeroing in on the literature review and methodology is partly because they are the most common across all disciplines, but also it's the part that can be done the most poorly if we don't step back and think about it really concretely. So the methodology section, whether it's a shorter part for a master's thesis or longer in a PhD dissertation, this is where you can be a bit meta. So you can say something about the field in which you work. And again, what you are demonstrating is that you understand the rules of the game as they apply to your field. So for instance, a scholar in a biochemical field will do research very differently than a legal scholar. And they will both do research very differently than a historian. So or a political theorist or a political studies researcher. And so again, political studies, political theory, they're different fields. So again, being able to step back for a moment and speak about your field is really important. And that situates not, so if the literature review is here's what other people have said, this is now, and this is how I'm going to do and produce the research that the rest of my analysis will display for you. And so you need to know the jargon and the vocabulary of your field and use it properly here. So are you collecting data from live samples? Are you conducting interviews with human participants? Are you engaged in personal or ethnographic research? Is your work highly theoretical? Are you doing policy-driven investigative work? Are you providing historical work? Is your work looking at archival and material documents? Are you engaged in experiments in a lab? Are you working on something through a variety of case studies? Are you combining case studies with a theoretical approach? Are you providing policy analysis and recommendations? So those are all examples of different methodological approaches that you might want to lay out for your reader. And the only person who's going to know your field is you, but you need to be very precise in outlining how you do what you do. And a very typical question at most PhD defenses is a question to talk about your methodology. Why did you choose this methodology? What are the strengths and the weaknesses of this methodology? Where are there potential gaps or things that were out of scope? So being able to think about that and articulate those questions at the beginning of your thesis or dissertation project gets you in the exact right headspace that you're going to need to be when you get to the defense of your overall project. But again, it also helps you to articulate the scope. This is my methodological approach. This is what's in scope. This is what's out of scope. And then these are the gaps, So for instance, certain kinds of research, you can't control all of the variables. So in your methodological approach, you will identify where the inability to control for all of those variables can lead to some statistically significant questions about how precise the data is at the end of the day. And you want to be upfront about that and show, okay, so we know that there's this potential risk. We're still able to draw these kinds of conclusions. Similarly, again, if you're doing a case analysis and then extrapolating that out to more general insights, you'll want to identify and say, okay, well, we've done this case analysis, so it gestures towards broad conclusions, but there are limits that we would need to expand a little bit further on. So those are some examples of the ways in which you can jump into the methodology section. And if you will permit me, this is where I will jump in. So again, excuse me, Joellen asked me at the beginning to talk about my own journey from being a professor to being a chief operating officer. And so that again had me from being a professor, creating SAJAC, and now into WiseWriter. So you can see WiseWriter at the top, and any of you can sign up, and it's free, and you can use it to your heart's content. And again, if you already have an SAJAC account previously, so maybe you've discovered SAJAC before the acquisition, you can still log into your account. We haven't closed it down in its entirety yet, so SAJAC still exists. Thank you. Yes, I am already signed in. So SAJAC still exists, and you can play around with the essay writing platform that it used to be. But from WiseWriter as well, this is where you can start writing for free in the WiseWriter platform. You can create your free account. And so what I want to do here is jump in so that I can show you a little bit about that literature review and that methodology section, so you can see things a little bit in practice. So let's just say, my dissertation is going to be what I start writing. There are all of these templates in place. The advanced academic essay, so the most advanced academic essay is a dissertation or a thesis. So we'll go in and create that. I'll make this a little bit bigger.
Smaller. There we go.
There we go. Want it to be bigger, not smaller. So again, this is our introduction, body, and conclusion. Again, the topic, background, thesis statement. So again, topic, we've talked about that. Background, we've talked about. But now this is where we can start to provide that literature review. So the initial background is that setting the stage, but then there's extended background. And let's see, I'll close this so we can see everything. So what is extended background? An extended background is in some ways that literature review. So it gives more details and context, usually involving references to outside sources. So what are the important historical or scholarly details that speak directly to your point? And so again, this is where you can start to build up that literature review. So we've got sentence starters here. So, the major participants in this debate are. So in the example, when I was talking about the literature review, I was saying, you may have X and Y, and that's how you've categorized. It may be that there is an ongoing debate in the field. And so I'm going to spell out, who these scholars are who are debating about something that I'm entering into as a scholar in the field. And then as you go on, you can add more and more evidence and explanation. And this is how you build up that literature review. So this first evidence is going to be, an example to analyze is blah, blah, blah. And that's the first kind of quotation, the first position that I'm bringing to bear from this literature review. And then I'm going to explain that literature review, how it shows so-and-so is part of one side of the debate. So, plausible interpretation of the above is that so-and-so is on one side of the debate. And we can add more evidence and have another quotation from somebody on the other side of the debate. So again, as we go along, I can kind of show you that we can sort of preview as we start to write that literature review section. You can kind of build in all of those component parts. And once again, there's tips and prompts and questions that you can kind of use to explain as you layer in those component parts for the literature review. So again, what you're trying to do and write the literature review is technically it's a summary of the research, but it has to do more than just be a list or a summary. It has to be the research that you've then categorized in some way that makes sense for your scholarship. And then the second part that I said is worth paying attention to a little bit more closely is that methodology section. So once you've provided your thesis statement or your problem statement, you can have the approach or method. So again, what is approach or method? States what field you're working in and how you plan to make your argument within that field. So the how is the most important. So again, we have some examples, compare and contrast, case analysis, whatever it is how you're going to build up your methodology section. Once again, we've got sentence starters that help you to get started thinking about methodological questions. So my methodology is, that's a simple one. You can then say, okay, my methodology is lab work. And then you spell that out in detail. My work is informed by, and then there may be some giants in the field, some scholars who are a towering influence for you. And again, you'll want to characterize what that work is. This essay or this dissertation is built upon the foundations of critical legal scholarship. And then you kind of have to go through and explain what those tenets of critical legal scholarship may be. this analysis draws resources from, literary analysis. So I'm going to draw resources from certain kinds of literary analysis, particularly, let's say, Marxist criticism. And then I am going to outline each of those. The theoretical framework is based upon, I'm going to outline what is the model, that theoretical model that underpins my research. Again, critical resources informing this approach have been influenced by, these are the kinds of sentences that you need to get yourself starting to think about the how. What is the methodological how of what you do? The argument proceeds within the discipline of, religious studies, within the discipline of medical microbiology, whatever your field is, you want to be very specific. Again, the paradigm within which I operate. This argument grows out of a tradition. The character of my analysis is descriptive, prescriptive, theoretical, empirical. So these are all examples to help you think about talking about your methodological approach in a very distanced way. So sometimes what the challenge is in starting a dissertation or a thesis is we're so close to the research. We are in our own particular puzzle, and it's hard to step back for a moment and say, okay, well, how does my small little piece of this puzzle actually fit within the field as a whole? And so both the literature review and the methodological sections are opportunities for you to demonstrate that even though the rest of your thesis and dissertation is going to get into the minute details of your small thing, but that you are situating that small thing, that smaller contribution that you're making into the field as a whole. So that's kind of how it all goes together from that literature review and methodological section, which are core components to any thesis or dissertation.
Perfect. And I mean, I think it's so important for us to go through all of these pieces because, again, using a tool like this allows you to teach yourself. It's not just simply getting the work done. You're actually learning. It's a hands-on learning process. So you become a better thinker, you become a better researcher, and you most definitely become a better writer. And what you can also do when you're looking at this in the backwards, before you're going on to an editor, is you can kind of self-edit in terms of what did I include, what did I omit, and it will have blank spaces there, and that's really, really great. So when your editor comes in and they're, you've gotten these things, their questions are going to be specific enough that you can fill in the pieces that you may not have seen. Again, you're in the woods, you can't see the trees, but you definitely know what you've done. You've got it organized in a manner. So now we can have a conversation about what you're proposing as opposed to what are you trying to say?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's so key because if you can get these structural elements right or right enough, obviously everything is subject to refinement, but if you can get these structural elements right enough, then the help you can get from an editor, the help you can get from your supervisor, committee, or other colleagues is going to be so much more valuable because then you can even speak and say, like, I'm really struggling with my methodology section. Here's, my draft of my methodology section. Does it make sense? Do you understand? And then an editor is going to be able to provide meaningful feedback, both at the content level as well as at the sort of grammar, spelling, punctuation, stylistic level, knowing, oh, okay, this is the methodology section. As a sample reader, as an editor, in reading this, do I now understand enough about your field? And that can be really helpful. Whereas if you just kind of like, here's my introduction, or here's my entire dissertation, now edit it for me, that can be a really hard task on the part of the person on the other end who's now jumping in and providing you with that help. So being able to understand the component parts and then get help on the component parts along the way is a really smart way of tackling a large project, particularly a PhD dissertation.
Oh, it's a lot. It's a lot, and it's really great to that's an understatement, but to be able to start there with a tool that kind of walks you through, teaches you how to think, how to organize, how to put it together, and then having that as your foundation of where your conversations start, having an understanding of what the sections as we've spoken about really, really does help you so much, because you're going to be putting down quite a bit of an investment for, editing. And of course, because you're getting a PhD person who not only understands what you're writing about, but understands what your review team and your committee are looking for. And that's so important, that they know, how to fill in those blocks. So you're not both going in going, hoping it's going to work. You've got somebody on your team who says, no, you're missing this section. And I guarantee you, if you don't put this in, you're not going to get approved. So having those there, it's all coming around. And I mean, these tools are so amazing because this is new. This is so new out there. And it just makes it easier and better. And the competition is hard. It's really hard. So use the tools that are available, very affordable, to make the best impressions and to take away some of the stress, and allows you, especially if you're going to PhD, it's not your first time at the rodeo. You're going to be doing a lot of this. So keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, it's sort of the affordable, as in this year, especially for Wise Writer, you can access it and play around for free. So nothing more affordable than free. And then, as you say, Joelle, the technologies out there are relatively new. I mean, back in the day when I started both my master's and then subsequently my PhD, like the way that I kind of had to figure out what these research papers looked like was just by literally going to the library and checking out previous master's and PhD work and kind of reading and trying to decode what it was that other people who had been successful had done. And that was a lot of kind of then backwards construction to try to figure out what they had done and then create something that I could apply to my own work. Whereas that work that I did back in the day has now found its new life in the technology. So you don't have to go to the library and read, sort of every single dissertation or master's thesis in the field before you even start writing your own.
Exactly. So, I mean, my advice is, to use the tools that help you the best. And when you're going into the fundamentals of thesis writing, you really, really, to have kind of a templated format that allows you to go in and to also get these stimulants, what should I put here? How do I want to present this? It just makes it easier, and you're using the correct language. And I cannot emphasize enough, if it's English as a second language, which many, many students are, this just takes so much stress off. And, it's going to help you understand what your editor is referring to, methodology and things like that. You really, really need to zone in so that you can focus on what you do well, which is your subject matter. Stick to the subject matter. Unfortunately, you can be super smart, but if you can't convey that logically and concisely within your writing, it won't matter. So this is necessary. It's just the way it is. But having this tool, fantastic. Absolutely cannot express enough how much we appreciate it as editors, because now we can look at it from the, not just the grammar, spelling, punctuation, but, okay, what is the overall structure and how are you developing this and how are you supporting your statements? And, and then we can go into your citations, your references and that too, and just make sure it's all right. And that any mistakes are caught before you go into submission stage. So it's very important.
Yeah.
All right. I'm getting some little questions and answers going on here. Really appreciate and thank you. Awesome work. Please keep the good work going on. Yes, absolutely. So we have some nice comments there. Is anyone can see my writings at this tool? Can anyone see their writings at this tool?
No. Good, really good question. This is all yours. So you create your own accounts. Nobody looks at it except for you. You can download whatever you write and then you can share it with whoever you want. So, say you use the tool, you edit as much as you want, you download it, and you send it off to Joellen and her team at First Editing if they're going to be your editor of choice. But like on the back end, I'm not going to be lurking in and looking at what you write. I don't have access to that.
No. Your privacy and all those things are always protected. And but a very good question, because of course it is your baby and you put all your time and energy into it. You don't want to
it's an excellent question. I mean, and at Wise Prep broadly, we take academic integrity and intellectual property rights very seriously. So we provide the tools, but the writing is your own.
Yep. Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So nice to see there. Well, again, I do want to thank you for coming in and walking us through this today. It really helps us to communicate on the same platform, the same standard, the same ideas, the same concepts, and to clearly identify what's going on out there. Those of you who've been following, please go over and check out wiseprep.com. And this is Wise Writer. It was formerly Essay Jack. So this is really a writing tool to help you with all your academic research out there. And when you're ready to find an editor, please come to firstediting.com. We will give you a free editing sample. We'll tell you what you need and how we're going to proceed. And again, it's very helpful to have a team backing you and to take that stress off so that you can succeed. So again, thank you, everyone. Subscribe, follow, like, share, all that fun stuff. And we'll see you again at our next presentation. And thank you for joining us, Dr. Lindy Ledohowski.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great day. Bye, everyone.